professor Barry Smith. Queremos agradecer uma excelente palestra. E eu peço licença, apesar para iniciar as perguntas, mas que a questão que o professor Barry Smith coloca me toca profundamente, por conta que eu estou trabalhando com as ontologias da Biofolder, no pós-doc que eu estou fazendo na Fiocruz, exatamente com o problema que ele coloca da impossibilidade, talvez, de uma integração dessas ontologias. Então, eu quero colocar uma questão que eu também não sei o caminho, eu e as minhas colegas e as minhas orientandas aqui de doutorado, que a gente está num impasse. A grande questão é que nós estamos trabalhando num laboratório de biologia molecular que trabalha com sequenciamento genômico dos trypanosomatídeos, né, que é um organismo. E esse sequenciamento genômico, a gente não tem especificamente uma ontologia de trypanosomatídeos para representar todas no momento da anotação genômica que isso ocorre. A gente tem caminhado por pensando de atuar na linha que o Obiodit tem apresentado na questão da GoSlim, né, que são ontologias reduzidas para organismos específicos, que, a partir dessa interoperabilidade entre as ontologias, é possível você, com recorte, fazer reuso dessas ontologias e construir uma ontologia especificamente para um organismo específico. Nós já mapeamos, basicamente, 7 ontologias, não é, Laura? E recortamos essas classes para verificar um estudo de reuso e de compatibilidade entre isso. E agora o professor Barry Smith tira o chão da gente, né? Na verdade, ele puxa o tapete, né? E ele diz que não, talvez isso não seja a solução, né? E a gente tem trabalhado nesse sentido, inclusive, de pensar numa linha que seria um sistema que a gente chama de intermediário, um sistema de compatibilidade, que é uma linguagem intermediária que possibilitaria, como, né, vamos dizer assim, a compatibilidade entre essas ontologias, porque a gente verifica também que aqui no Brasil a gente não tem, vamos dizer, financiamento de pesquisa suficiente para manter atualizada essas ontologias, né? Essas ontologias ou essas diversas classes que comporiam uma ontologia em trypanosomatídeos. Então, agora, professor, eu faço a pergunta: o que a gente faz? O que eu faço com a GoSlim? Qual é a proposta da GoSlim?
So there are 2 aspects to your question, as I conceive it. One aspect I've addressed already here. So this is not your example, but you see that it's a similar example. What if I need my own ontology to meet my own special purposes? So it's not just ontology engineers who create ontologies. Biologists working in the field very often discover that for specific reasons they need to create an ontology. It may be that they have a clinical trial with a lot of data about a highly specific kind of phenomenon. There is no ontology dealing with that phenomenon, and it's not like proteins. It's something much more narrow or much more local in its importance. So what do? Well, this is something which I can discuss on Thursday if people are interested, but we have a strategy for building what we call application ontologies. Now, GoSlims are an example of application ontologies, but there are many other kinds of application ontologies. And the problem with application ontologies, which just means ontologies built for specific applications, is that they create silos. In order to counteract the problem of silos, the application ontologies should be developed from the start using terms whose definitions employ the resources of reference ontologies like the ones in the Foundry. So you take terms from Foundry ontologies as far as you can. Maybe 60%, maybe 20%, but every little helps to solve the silo problem. And then when the reference ontologies are updated, your application ontology will automatically be updated because you're using terms taken from those reference ontologies, and they're cross-linked in the way in which we are learning how to do, we hope, from the semantic web. So your work will be updated in tandem with the work being done at the lower levels. I think that, so this is very hard to do, but I think that this is the only rational approach, because anything else will create silos. Now there's another interesting issue. So I've thought about this issue a lot already. Another interesting issue you raised at the end, I haven't thought about before, but I think it's important to address it, which is, you said Brazil does not have funding to keep these ontologies up to date. Now, I think that one benefit of the Obo Foundry approach is that it supports collaboration. So there are things that you can do in Brazil. You should be doing them in collaboration with people in other countries in such a way that you are making a real contribution to the whole, rather than creating a new alternative for your bit, because then you're creating a silo, a Brazilian silo, which you shouldn't want. You want Brazilian science to be part of science. So the science that is essentially a unitary enterprise. There cannot be a Brazilian science and a Western science, or a Nordic science. And orthogonality in ontology is just the unity principle. If you have a protein ontology in Australia and a protein ontology in Georgetown, then those two protein ontologies need to be brought together. Otherwise, we're not doing science, we're doing culture.
Bom, é exatamente nessa linha que nós estamos caminhando, né? De reaproveitamento, né? De reuso, nesse sentido, de reaproveitar todo o esforço de pesquisa feito, né? E possibilitar uma coisa fundamental nesse consórcio internacional, que é o consórcio genômico, que é de transferência, né, de informação e de conhecimento. Então, vamos conversar mais, né, com calma. E eu acho que eu só queria que o senhor falasse sobre se a Go Slim, porque a gente ainda fica com dúvidas, se é essa vamos dizer assim, a expectativa colocada nesse projeto da Go Slim. Porque nós verificamos que existem, basicamente, umas 20 Go Slim já, né, colocada com organismos específicos. Se é esse projeto, porque é um projeto da Biofolder também, né?
I can point to some literature which is I think a very promising strategy for creating a more systematic approach to the formation of Go Slims. So the author of the relevant piece, I'm afraid, is called Václav Kuzniewczyk.
Professor Barry-Smith, I want to thank you for the insightful presentation. But I had a question, maybe a provocative question. Why should we have consensual ontologies? I was thinking, it's not a question of language. It's a question of thought. We may have today English, like you have said yesterday. English is the language for excellence, like French were someday, and maybe I don't expect it, but Chinese may be someday. But it's not a question of language. And if we were having the same conversation about some more different team like politics, it would be clear that we couldn't have agreement to have a single ontology on politics. Maybe in very specific and controlled domains we may have it, but I think that language it's an emergent property of thought, but I'm not sure if vice versa. If thought it may be an emergent property of language. So why should we have? Why should we expect to have consensual ontologies on fields fields not controlled like biomedics?
So when you say tough, you mean power? No?
Tough. Mind.
Thought. Good.
Language.
Okay. Power is interesting. I was hoping we were going to talk about power, but I think that to do science, you need to be part of the scientific community, and it's a world community. And by accident, the language of science today is English. It used to be Latin. Maybe it was going to be German for a time, but it's now English. And I think it's obvious that to do science, you should use language. However, I agree with you that it's not language which is important. So the ontology, the view of ontology as a controlled vocabulary, which is the gene ontology favored way of expressing it, is, I think, wrong, precisely because it places too much emphasis on language. Where I would prefer to rest my case is on controlled representations. We need a system of controlled representations of things like cellular components and molecular processes and so forth. Now, these controlled representations might be numbers. They might be digital identifiers. We would still need to have a checklist which would assign them humanly intelligible equivalents, but they could be in Portuguese as well as in English. So I agree with you that language is not the crucial thing. What is important is controlled representations with a logical content of the sort that we've been talking about in earlier sessions at this meeting.
Minha área é de gestão do conhecimento. E a gente trabalha um pouco o conhecimento como uma fonte de riqueza. E por isso que eu falei o seguinte, ontologia também tem a ver com poder, de certa forma. E, por exemplo, também o que o senhor apresentou aqui tem muito a ver com ciência, mas se eu pensasse, na sexta-feira eu precisei de uma ontologia de hotéis para vir para o Rio, para localizar um hotel com as características que eu quisesse. Então, uma coisa muito prática, diferente de ciência, e onde realmente acontecem os silos. Por outro lado, quando eu apresento ontologia para os alunos em web semântica, o primeiro que eles falam, uma ontologia centralizada. Mas se a gente pensar na web, o que fez o sucesso da web é não ter nada centralizado. Que se cada um publica o que quer, como quer e onde quer. E nós temos que conviver com isso. E quando começou a web, o pessoal dizia, não vai funcionar se não tiver um índice centralizado. E aí apareceu Google, Yahoo, formas diferentes de fazer. Por isso que eu perguntaria como é que vê a questão das ontologias, por exemplo, dentro de uma empresa, onde vai ter o conhecimento da empresa, eu vou utilizar uma ontologia, vou repassar essa ontologia para o concorrente, fica complicado.
I like to make a comparison between the Oboe Foundry and the open source software development tradition. So the Linux is a very interesting social product because it seems to have been developed by people investing a lot of time and energy with no reward. Now, why would people do that? Why would people invest so much time creating a public good for which they get no reward? And how is it possible that all of those contributions which are coming in freely should work together? The answer is that there is a reward, which is that you get respect from your colleagues and you get influence on the product. And the question about how it all works together was actually very difficult to solve. So there is a very nice book by a man called Stephen Weber, about the history of Linux, which reveals that there were tragic periods when the Linux project almost died because they couldn't solve the authority problem. In the end, they did solve the authority problem by creating a pope with a hierarchical authority structure in order to make things work together at different levels. And that's what we're doing with the Oboe Foundry. We have 6 popes, but they work well together so far. Now, with Nicola yesterday pointed to the problems with making service-oriented architectures work, where you're dealing with many different companies. And he is pessimistic, I am pessimistic, IBM is pessimistic that service-oriented architectures will ever work, except within a service park, I think is what the term he used. So what is a service park? It's a place where there is a single pope who can tell people in the company how they need to build their services. Now, I think that what we learn from this is that in some fields, the web, open, anarchy, Tim Berners-Lee kind of adolescent rock music thing will work. You can create long lists of rock music things and put them on the semantic web, and they work very well. And you can populate them distributively without any kind of pope. But as soon as you're doing anything serious, you need adult supervision. And that in medicine, in even serious culture ontology, which will really do justice to the different kinds of music in a culturally rich tradition, you're going to need to have adult supervision. So wikis and so forth work where you're dealing with long lists of things. But as soon as you have something where things have to work together in complicated ways, then the wiki approach is not going to work. And it's not been made to work in any of the biology fields that have tried it. What happened was that you had an initial period of enthusiasm where you got a few dozen people who really did contribute to building the ontology in a distributed way, but then very quickly that enthusiasm died and you had to go back to the old methods.
I want to know what you think about in such a domain such as oil and gas. There is, I think, a problem similar to biomedical, because you need that audit supervise the work and things like that. And people are using ISO as an ISO. I think the number is
ISO 15926.
Yeah, exactly.
I have published on ISO 15926.
I read your paper. Well, for me, it's a problem because you have an ontology that is being built as a common conceptualization about this domain, but it lacks formality, for example.
It lacks?
Formality.
Yes, good.
And how to have only one ontology if this one is the ontology? How can you work with this problem?
Yeah, so this is the homesteading problem. Sometimes bad people get there first. And in the oil and gas industry, somebody who is very loud and very patient and very well-funded, he managed to persuade the International Standards Organization to turn his nonsense into an international standard. And the result is causing incredible pain and incredible waste in the oil industry. And my favorite methodology is humiliation. So I just tried to humiliate him, and he's so tough he refused to see what is obvious. It's nonsense. And I could talk for 4 hours about the nonsense in ISO 15926.
I'm a little bit puzzled by the title of your presentation, because you say ontology science. I agree completely with you that ontology is the result of an activity, of the ontologizing activity. The results of this activity belong to science. I share. You convince me. I mean, it's obvious. No, it's not obvious, but it is understandable and well argued for. So ontologies, in particular, those ontologies developed within medicine belong to medicine. That's fine. And this is one part of science, namely medicine. But on what ontology, the methodology, the principle, it's another science. So one thing is the ontology development science, and one thing is the result of the final products of this activity. So maybe the second one, the ontology development science, belongs to engineering. Maybe it can be promoted to the level of science. But you didn't say that much on this aspect.
Yeah. So I developed some of these ideas, as you know, in a longer paper, which will be presented at the FOIS meeting. So one of the ways in which Nicola and I have interacted for 15 years now is in the series of meetings called FOIS, which is Formal Ontology and Information Systems. And the next FOIS meeting will be in Saarbrücken in November of this year. And at that meeting, I will present a paper called Ontology Science. Now, in that paper, there is half a page devoted to this question. I agree it's not enough, but there I suggest the following. First of all, I'm only interested in ontologies developed in support of scientific research. I give you culture and reincarnation and football and all of the television stuff. I'm only interested in those ontologies. Now, I think that for those ontologies, the methodology of building ontology is also part of science. Or it's a more philosophical end of science. It's not part of engineering. So it's about things like how we make application ontologies work well together, how we use reference ontologies in order to annotate literature, some of which have some engineering aspects. But mainly it's about things like how we evaluate ontologies, how we ensure that ontologies are scientifically correct, how we make ontologies a part of science in a form which will enable the people who build them to get scientific credit. So one of my own goals is, and I'm beginning to realize this goal, is to create something like an ontology publishing project. So the Nature Publishing Company publishes journals like Nature Biotechnology. They also publish databases. So there are now something like 20 Nature database publishing outlets, which are websites called things like Nature Signaling or Nature Molecule, and these websites contain databases which are peer-reviewed. So to be a part of the Nature Signaling database, your database has to be peer-reviewed by Nature peer reviews. Now, the Obo Foundry is currently negotiating with Nature to create a Nature ontologies. And the ontologies within the Nature ontologies will be peer-reviewed. Now, that's important because if you're doing science, you need a job. And if you want to get a job, you have to have peer-reviewed publications. And if you write ontologies, you don't get any credit. So we're solving that problem. And this we hope will bring more incentives to doing good work in ontology.
I have a more specific question on trying to understand the decisions that were taken while the whole set of current OBO ontologies were being built. What kind of criteria do you have for establishing what really is a new domain, another ontology to be built? And second, why gene ontology was conceived having three facets.
So the first question actually overlaps with Nicola's question. It's one of those questions which belong to ontology methodology. How do we recognize a domain when we see it? So there is now a proposal to submit a cell cycle ontology to the foundry, the OBO foundry. Should we allow the cell cycle ontology to be a new ontology, or should it be just a part of the biological process ontology? To be honest, we are learning by doing how to answer those questions. It's not easy. It's like the question, how many languages are spoken in Brazil? It's not easy to know when you're dealing with one language or two languages. Now, I've forgotten your second question.
It's about the three facets that
Yes,
you have
I
on
think-
gene ontology.
So I think that when Michael Ashburner was creating the gene ontology, and the folklore is that he did this in one afternoon. So he got really upset by somebody at a meeting in Montreal. And as a response to this person's provocation, he went away for an afternoon with an envelope, and he wrote down the gene ontology on the back of this envelope. And he did it by taking the Oxford Dictionary Molecular Biology and picking out the words that he thought he needed for his research. The fly community, he's a major fly biologist, and the fly community was at that point reaching the stage where they had too much data to be published in book form, so they needed to publish their data in computer form, and they needed a way of doing that. This is really early stumbling work. Now, when he did this envelope thing, he saw that there were three kinds of terms he needed. One kind of term for the cellular components, one kind of term for the molecular functions, and one kind of term, the much longer list of biological processes. And that's how the gene ontology was formed. I believe that the gene ontology is misnamed, and that the gene ontology should die and be reborn as three separate ontologies. But that's one of those peccadillos of founder effects.
And just the last thing, I was about to ask you that when we have that question about the petroleum area, I'm also working with the electric area, the electric systems area, and I have the general feeling that this authority thing is something that I believe sometimes you need, but the problem is when you get the wrong authority, because there we also have a common model. And I think the general feeling by the community is that it's the bad model, and it's imposed to the community. So it's a dangerous thing.
There is one reason for hope, in the sense that we are learning more and more how to do this properly, and we are beginning to have success stories. So I think the infectious disease ontology is already a success story. And those success stories gradually will lead people in a wider community to see what works and what doesn't work. And I have hope even for the oil and gas industry.
Hi, it's Mara from Federal do Rio Grande do Sul. I think that you have done a misunderstanding of the thought and theft, but it's a very correct one. I think that to propose the ontology is a problem of power, indeed. It's not a problem of model of minds. We have developed a successful ontology, and I can share with you the way that we could transform in the ontology for the domain. Of course, it's a smaller domain comparing with genetic or proteins and so on, but is a very tough one, because it's reservoir analysis, is rock reservoir analysis that involves powerful oil companies and so on. But what we have done, first of all, finding very good people in modeling and computer science, and finding best people in, of course, reservoir analysis. Otherwise, it's impossible to get a good ontology. But when we found that we have something that was good, we started doing some negotiation in such a way that we got a strong alliance, international alliance for people that work in that area. And then we work in two fronts. In one of them is convincing people that we have a good modeling, negotiate with them, and otherwise telling to them that we have done the the borrowing part, that's formalizing the vocabulary and so on. And this kind of thing is very strong, because many of them would like to call a mineral John instead of Paul, like we have done in the ontology. But people are lazy and think, okay, but this is ready, I can use like this, and then is share it to talk with other people. And for companies that has good system, we use this kind of thing. Okay, but we have formalized it. And for people that don't have good systems, like Petrobras, that was our strong partner in this imposing this ontology. For Petrobras, it's easy because they, of course, that they had in advance very strong vocabulary and definition and so on, but they don't have good system. And then we told, okay, you have the vocabulary, but if you call Paul instead of John this mineral, you have this very good system to use to support your test. And again, lazy people used to agree with this. So I am ashamed to say, but that's true. I don't know if our ontology is the best, but we have done the work. And we have transformed this ontology in an international standard for this area. And most of this, we don't share this ontology for free because we sell them. And so sometimes people need to believe us that is good and buy to us because it's the best, complete and formal, with strong academic and scientific people behind. But it's a kind of negotiation of power in teaching things in some domain. It's like this.
So your story is very interesting, and it makes clear that there are different ways to reach the position where your ontology is the authoritative ontology. And that's fine. Any way is fine. So the gene ontology was successful not because it was good, but because Michael Ashburner was a very powerful gentleman. He was just a tough guy who with a loud voice, and he fortunately he was also willing to correct his mistakes. But there is an issue that you raise at the very end about open source ontology. So there is an opposition between ontology science and ontology engineering, and then there is an opposition between open source ontology and ontology that is bought and sold. Now, as I say, I'm only interested in ontology in the domain of ontologies to support scientific research, and I assume that they should be open source. But I can't help thinking that you can get benefits also in other areas, at least by publishing the terminological part of your ontology as an open source ontology, and you can keep the underlying formal parts.
Hello, Professor. You talk about the difficulty of ontology integration, and we in our research we believe in standards, and we believe in ontology reuse. And so we have the protein ontology, for instance, we want to use it, and also gene ontology and biological process. But we understand that proteins have a role in biological process. And so what we are intended to do is to map this kind of relationships. And
Good.
In a way, we are trying to integrate those ontologies. And how do you address these issues?
Yeah, so we had this slide here. So I made some remarks earlier about no more mappings because mappings are expensive and fragile and you can't keep them up to date. But the kind of mappings I'm talking about now are mappings between 2 or 7 ontologies of the same domain. And it seems to me to be obvious that we should not be wasting our time building 7 different protein ontologies and then building, how many is it, 49 different mappings between them? Not 49, 42, I don't know. That's a waste. What we should do is get all the people interested in protein ontology to work together to create a single authoritative protein ontology, which will be open to criticism, modification, extension over time. Other kinds of mappings of the sort you describe are perfectly possible and required. So we do need to map proteins to biological processes. And there are the ways in which we can do that most successfully still need to be worked out. So that's that's part of the process. The process is that to do a good study of the way proteins are involved in biological processes, you need a good biological process ontology and you need a good protein ontology. And we offer a strategy to achieve those two things, and then you need to do the work in finding how to build the more precise representations that you describe.
Another aspect is that Maria Luisa talked about go slim. It's because one of the difficulties we have is because gene ontology is huge, and to manipulate it, it's complex. And so we can focus on our domain, the trypanosomatids, and make a subset of gene ontology and work with this subset to integrate, like in this way, with protein ontologies, and also make a protein slim and make these maps.
Well, the protein ontology, or at least the Georgetown protein ontology, is still very small, so it's only a few months old. So I hope you're not making a too tiny fraction of a very tiny...
No, actually we are just beginning the...
Okay, good. But you should remember that all of the ontologies in the Foundry are works in progress, and they rely on users to tell them what to do next. So if you have terms or whole vocabularies that you think need to be included in the biological process ontology, for instance, then you should submit them. There are very easy ways, trackers for each ontology, for people to submit terms and corrections of existing terms. And that's one of the reasons why the gene ontology is updated every night, because there are many user groups who are indeed submitting both terms and corrections.
Professor, I'd like to know something about relationships ontology, because I thought it is growing, the relations, because it was only is a and part of. And I think it is modifying this looking for the process, for the biological process and function.
So we have a larger relation ontology with about 12 relations already published, and that's being used now by many people. We are going to be publishing chapter 2 of that very soon, which will contain another 12 or so relations, including relations like is function of, has functioning, and so forth. So, and again, if you have needs for relations which you think are likely to be of general interest, then you should submit them. This is one step towards creating the needed formal semantics, yes. So all of the relations in the relation ontology are logically well defined. And that one of the reasons why the relation ontology grows slowly is because it turns out that many of the relations that you would like, for instance, causes, are very difficult to define. And I'm actually skeptical that we will ever have a good definition of cause. And one big difference between the OBO Foundry and the semantic web is that in the semantic web you can create relations just like that. And they do. And the result is beautifully large networks which don't give you any kind of reasoning power at all. The relations are just black boxes. So what we want is to be in a position where the relations used, all the relations used in the Foundry, are relations which will give you some kind of logical reasoning power.
Nosso grupo de pesquisa também está muito interessado nos aspectos teóricos e metodológicos relacionados à construção de ontologia, né? A gente está atuando numa área aplicada, que é a área de biomedicina, mas esses aspectos, então, dessa forma, toda a literatura que o senhor vem apresentando nos toca muito, né, relacionada a todos esses aspectos teóricos. E aí tem especificamente um texto chamado Visteria, né, e além dos conceitos, né, produzido pelo senhor, que nós, de alguma maneira, eu quero colocar uma questão para reafirmar até um posicionamento metodológico aqui de uma linha da ciência da informação, né, que quando o senhor diz, a gente também acredita não numa visão psicológica, né, ou psicologista da definição de conceito, que o Wister vai dizer que o conceito é uma unidade de pensamento. A gente aqui já vem trabalhando dentro de uma linha que é uma visão da Dauber, que é uma visão mais conceptológica, em que vai dizer que o conceito é uma unidade de conhecimento, né, que está inserido dentro de um contexto, com um universo de discurso, com um grupo de falantes, né? Então, a minha questão é a seguinte, professor. Em um dado momento do seu texto, além dos conceitos, o senhor afirma da não necessidade em determinadas comunidades do uso, por exemplo, do ISA, né, do uso da relação de abstração, porque esses indivíduos falantes desse contexto já exatamente conhecem ou sabem a significação desse dado no mundo, vamos dizer assim. Como é que isso fica na ontologia? A gente está muito preocupado com definições explícitas, formais, né, lógicas, né, para que a gente consiga formalização, né? A gente só conseguiria formalização nesse sentido. Eu queria que o senhor comentasse um pouco isso, nessa linha mais metodológica, por favor.
We talked earlier about the vocabulary question, whether ontology is about language, and I said that I preferred to see an ontology not as a controlled vocabulary, but as a controlled representation. And now your question is effectively, what is an ontology a controlled representation of? So what are the targets, or the objects of ontologies? And I'm going to talk in more detail about this on Thursday, so I'll just give you a quick summary of the historical background to all of this. I think probably in the engineering world generally, which is still the larger human ontology world, from a population point of view, there are more engineers working in ontology than there are scientists. From the ontology engineering point of view, an ontology is conceived as a representation of concepts. And then the question arises, what is a concept? Now, I can point to several definitions of concepts, including incoherent nonsense, but also including quite different views of what concepts are. Some people think concepts are meanings, some people think concepts are terms, some people think concepts are units of knowledge, some people think they're units of thought, some people think that they're ideas, and so on. Now, unfortunately, all of those different groups, some people think that they're all of those things in the same sentence. All of those different groups think they're doing the ontology of concepts, but they all have slightly different, more or less confused views about what they're doing. And as a result, the discipline of ontology is, I think, still in a shaky state. Now, you, I think, the way your question was formulated, have a clear idea of what you mean by concept. And that's fine. So you should pursue that clear idea. But you should be aware that other people are going to be talking about concepts who do not have clear ideas and who will take what you say and maybe poison it. I don't know. Now, that you referred to Wüster. Eugen Wüster is a very interesting character in the history of this thing. He was an Austrian amateur philosopher, businessman. He had a woodworking business. He built machines for saws and things. Trees are important in Austria. They have a lot of trees. And he was a fanatic about Esperanto. So he believed in a world language. And by accident, Eugen Wüster became the head of the International Standards Organization Terminology Division. And for 50 years, or many years, he dominated this division. He owned it. He was backed by the Soviet Union. All of the methodology, all of the original documents of the ISO terminology division were written by Worcester, who is an amateur philosopher, an Esperanto fanatic, and a woodworking engineer. He didn't know very much about anything, to be honest. And the result has kept terminology studies in a state which it is only now beginning to free itself from. So that one problem with ISO is that ISO is like a legal body. That means that precedent plays a role. So if ISO makes a decision X in 1950, then that decision X still has some validity in 2008. And Worcester made some amazing decisions. For instance, he asserted that terminology studies have nothing to do with reality. So whether a term refers to a real physical object or a unicorn or any other kind of thing, it's not relevant to terminology work. Now, I want my medical terminology not to include a section on pneumonia in Russian fiction, for instance. I want it to be about pneumonia. Otherwise, it's not a good terminology. Now, it's to the degree that ISO terminology standards influence medical terminology, we have a problem here. And I think that I could talk for hours about the problem that we have, which is influencing all the major standards efforts within medical terminology still today. And the paper you referred to, Worsteria, is a very short summary of some of the problems that Worcester bequeathed to the world of terminology.
In the field of natural language processing, the first information retrieval models used to assume that the terms were orthogonal. But then they have evolved to models that consider the meaning of the words and the concepts in consideration of the context and the other words in the phrase or in the whole text. If in a simple structure like a text, words are not assumed anymore to be orthogonal, can we decide to them to be in refined knowledge structures like ontologies? Because I think that in some fields like social sciences or the soft science in general, this is very difficult. Things have have meanings according to sophisticated contexts. And what about the social sciences ontologies?
So I will address just one part of what you're getting at by confessing that we are still in a very restricted state when we're dealing with the ontologies I was talking about. So basically, we still only have ontologies which deal with single nouns. The gene ontology is just a long list of single nouns and noun phrases, and the same is true of the cell ontology and the protein ontology. We don't really have a way of dealing with verbs, and we don't have a way of dealing with sentences, and we don't have a way, therefore, of dealing with things like pathways, because you can't really capture the structure of a pathway just using single nouns. One of our strategies, which I am very much in favor of, is called the strategy of low-hanging fruit. And this strategy says that for ontology purposes, you should do the easy parts first, and you should do those well. Make sure that you get noses and teeth and cells and nuclei right. And on that basis, then, you can start thinking about mappings between proteins and biological processes, and you can start thinking about the ontology of pathways. Maybe eventually we'll even start thinking about contexts. But at the moment, we're still at the noun level.
Professor, parabéns pela sua palestra, foi bastante esclarecedora, e a minha questão foge um pouco da questão da OBO. Mais interessado no meu foco de pesquisa em cima da UMLS, e eu observei em um dos seus slides que a utilização, pelo menos na sua pesquisa ali, apresenta um decréscimo no uso da UMLS. estaria ela já com aqueles problemas já apontados em trabalhos anteriores do senhor crescente, ou o campo de estudo passou a privilegiar mais essa parte genética?
So I talked about the degree to which in biomedical science we're dealing with communities who have their own special community terminologies. So the nursing community, for instance, has its own special nursing terminology, and the surgical community has its own special surgical terminology. The pathologists have their own special pathology terminology. And the UMLS is a compilation of all of those terminologies. And I have to say that the UMLS is fantastically valuable because it gives you some definitions, it gives you some interrelations between those terms. It's very easily accessed, and there is, for some of those terminologies in the UMLS, including the gene ontology, there is a lot of associated data. So you can use the UMLS for all kinds of mappings and all kinds of search purposes, and it's used every day by thousands and thousands of scientists in drug companies, for instance. So that the UMLS is a positive contribution to something, but it's not up to date anymore. It's based upon a technology which I think is now needing to be replaced. The OWL-based semantic web type of technology would already be a better approach. And so parts of the UMLS are indeed beginning to use description logic kinds of approaches. So the National Cancer Institute thesaurus is one of the terminologies in the UMLS. SNOMED is another terminology, and they're both moving towards an OWL approach to the way they structure their terminologies. That's just one small way in which the UMLS is mostly still out of date. Now, there are other problems with the UMLS, which, the OBO Foundry is the anti-UMLS. The OBO Foundry is designed to be so UMLS means Unified Medical Language System. The UMLS is not unified, and it's not a system. It's a rag bag, and a lot of it is junk, and some of it is good. Now, we want just the good bits.
You have many databases with terms from gene ontology, and then you can connect this information on the databases based on the terms of gene ontology. But now our biologists came to us with some new perspective. They say systems biology. They want to add knowledge from related, some like autologous genes. So I think we need also the terms from different databases, but we need knowledge of the instances also. So when I crossed that information of that multiple databases based on the terms of gene ontology, maybe that information is not relevant from the biology point of view, because they also need to have some additional knowledge of the autologous genes to validate that this has some biological meaning. I don't know if you get the idea.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we will address these kinds of questions on Thursday. So we talked a minute ago about what are controlled representations in ontologies representations of. Now, I then said many people think that they're representations of concepts. I would prefer to say that ontologies are representations of something like types or classes. And then they have instances, those things. And then we need to understand how the instances that you see in the laboratory are related to the types that the ontology represents. And that's actually one of the main parts of the Thursday workshop.
Thank you.
Professor Guarino, Professor Berry-Smith, one question more. All the efforts you describe deserve standardization. How is achieved agreements? How is achieved standardization in OBO Foundry? How are the mechanisms? How are the forums?
So the one way in which we achieve agreement is that the OBO Foundry is divided into modules. So orthogonal modules, each module has a group of experts who are in charge of that module. And they are all scientists working within the same scientific discipline, and so they use the standard scientific method in order to reach agreement. Now, it's not always so easy, but at least we divide the labor. So we have a division of labor based on the division of expertise. Then there is a higher level, which is the Linus Torvalds level, the Pope, which has to do with how we achieve agreement where the ontologies themselves are getting close to overlapping. So proteins have sequences. Should protein sequences be dealt with by the sequence ontology or by the protein ontology? The OBO Foundry has a board of 6 coordinating editors, of which I am one, which is charged with making such decisions. And basically, we need to make those decisions on the basis of resources. So the protein ontology has more resources than the sequence ontology, and so they can take over more of the load. But also on the basis of what seem to be attractive scientific joints of reality. And this is the question of the domain problem. So we are trying to find principles for dividing up domains so that we can leave it to the experts. And that is, in some degree, we're inventing domains. So the sequence ontology is inventing the domain of sequences. And surely, well, the existing sequence ontology is not yet good enough for the purposes that we need. So it's in process of quite considerable reform. And that reform will bring also new decisions about relations between sequence ontology, protein ontology, RNA ontology, and so forth. It's all a mess.
Thank you very much.